What's happening, folks? Geologist Philip Prince with an Appalachian classic today, Burks Garden, Virginia. Really, really intriguing landform feature in the Appalachians. What is this thing? Ancient impact structure, ancient volcano with just a crater left behind. What's going on here? Not every day that you see kind of a completely closed valley like this in the Appalachians. And there is an outlet here. Wolf Creek comes out of Burke's Garden. It has cut across the ridge there. But otherwise, if you're in the bottom of Burke's Garden, you look around, you're seeing mountain all around you in all directions. Weather is different here because of the cold air drainage getting trapped in there. It actually has a pretty late frost. I think the floor of the valley is about 3,000 feet above sea level. So it truly is a standout spot in the Appalachian landscape, but it's one that actually has a very rational explanation. And it's really no different than these other valleys and ridges around it. Structural geology explains this, and the behavior of different rock types in the Appalachian climate is what you're going to need to think about, figure out why Burke's Garden is there. So what's outlined in the middle of the garden there is kind of the giveaway that this isn't an impact structure or volcano or something like that. And it's kind of this elongated zone of little kind of bumpy hills there. That's actually where a slightly different kind of rock is poking out of the floor of the valley. Now, on the ridges around here, everywhere that's a mountain's made of sandstone. Much of Burke's Garden is floored by limestone. That little bumpy area is actually dolomite. It's similar to limestone. It doesn't weather and erode away quite the same. That's why it sticks up a little bit differently and makes that kind of bump there. And then you got shale valleys elsewhere. So limestone and dolomite and or shale, regardless, are going to make valleys in this landscape. Sandstone is going to make mountains. And when you put these together in certain combinations and wrinkle those layers up, get the erosion going over hundreds of millions of years, you end up with these crazy patterns that you're looking at today. Now, if this were a volcanic feature or an impact crater or something like that, that dolomite zone would not have that nice clean edge on it. Everything in the middle of the garden there would be quite disorderly compared to what it is today. And it's cool to look in there with good old LiDAR imagery. And we're looking down that dolomite ridge. You can actually see it's got a bunch of sinkholes on it here. And in fact, sinkholes are common throughout Burke's Garden. That's just what you get in limestone or dolomite bedrock in the Appalachians. But everything here is beautifully ordered. And in fact, this kind of smooth hillside here, you're actually seeing tilted dolomite layers there. So the layering of the rock is what makes the landscape here. It's what makes the hills, the mountains, the valleys, and everything else. So being able to think about structures that affect these rock layers and contort them into all kinds of interesting shapes is what's going to be necessary to kind of solve this Burke's Garden mystery, right? So how can you take folded layers and make an oval shape? And the key to understanding this is thinking about folding in cross sections, so kind of ups and downs, and then an erosional land surface cutting across those ups and downs. Now, this can be a pretty tough thing to think about and visualize. I know from experience because I spent quite literally years trying to learn to do that in college and graduate school and even beyond. I'm going to try to illustrate this with good old paint block diagrams as well as sort of like an animation almost that we're going to come back to after the what somebody called the drawing interlude here. I thought that was very nice. But I'm going to through these various steps do my best to give you a sense of what's going on underneath Burke's Garden, and more importantly, what's going on either side of it that is different from what's underneath the very what is in the structural sense the highest part of the Burke's Garden structure, but in the topographic sense is the lowest, right? And that's in and of itself kind of a weird thing to think about. But without further ado, gonna hop out here, do the paint block diagram thing, and hopefully start the ball rolling here as to how you would think about an Appalachian structure like this one and anything else in the Appalachian Valley and Ridge as far as that goes. Not too many ovals like this, but understanding any combination of ridges and valleys there requires the same line of thinking that you're about to see here. So hang on just a minute. Okay, so when you're thinking about valley and ridge landscapes, you got to be thinking about structural geology. How have the layers of rock been stacked on top of one another? Where will you see certain layers repeated? Where will certain layers be absent? And how do those layers behave in the landscape? In the Appalachian Valley and Ridge, sandstone makes mountains, shale and limestone and dolomite make valleys. And thinking on those terms, as simple as it sounds, is a really good way to just take a look at the landscape and have a pretty good sense of what's going on underneath it in terms of geologic structure. So, what I'm trying to draw up here is just kind of a basic valley and ridge landscape that's kind of like what you would see just up to the north of Burke's Garden. And there's not going to be a Burke's Garden in this, and that's kind of the point. What I'm going to do after we get this first one sketched out here is actually change it bit by bit to try to give you a sense of the type of geologic structures under the ground whose very tops, when they poke out at the land surface, actually produce the Burke's Garden landform. And just get that straight line. That's going to have to be good enough right there. I'm getting tired of messing with that. Some of these longer straights drawn here in paint can be really challenging, but I'm going to color code this so that you will be able to see where certain rock types are located and how they correspond to landforms. Do they make a valley or do they make a mountain that sticks up prominently in the landscape? And when you learn to think in these terms, you see something like a Burke's Garden, and you can make sense of it. In fact, you can actually just look at the landscape and right off the bat have at least some sense of what is underneath it in terms of geologic structures. And so we'll finish that out like that. Try to make this a good looking block here if I can get it together. Tell you what, need to not drink coffee or something like that. White these out. And if you've watched videos on this channel, you might look at this and say, well, that pretty much looks like what you always draw. To some extent. The Earth is fundamentally layered. Parts of the Earth's crust are even more exaggeratedly layered than others. And those layers can get folded, stacked, messed with, whatever you like, by plate tectonic movement and the resulting stress. And that's what makes all these really cool geologic structures that end up making landforms like Burke's Garden and other things that you see in the valley and ridge. And learning to read those patterns is what it's all about. And there's always going to be at least a certain measure of similarity, yeah, because Earth's rocks behave within a range of ways. That's why you can study geology and actually end up with a skill set that you can apply all over the place. What we're filling in now is just some of these last colors. Very nice. Okay, that's going to be workable, I think. So baseline starting point here. Got a sequence of rocks going from this blue-gray up to orange, up to this maroon color. And that maroon color is going to be the one it's actually making the ridges here. Anytime that maroon color is sticking up to the surface, that's going to make a mountain. All right. Keep that in mind. As it turns out, in that purple layer, which is the youngest that I'm showing in the folded part of this cross section, it can also make a mountain ridge if you've got the youngest or a younger layer within it. And that's like what Little Walker Mountain is if you're from this part of Virginia. Otherwise, it's not too well represented in the area, right? So it's going to be that maroon, that kind of brick red layer that's going to be doing all the talking here. What you get out here, way out ahead of all the folds, there's that kind of like straw yellow layer, kind of a tan color or something. That's going to be the youngest rocks in the entire view here. That's the Appalachian Plateau. All right, so that's West Virginia, coalfield kind of areas, younger rocks, different landscape, the whole 9 yards. Last touch here should be to put some green on it. And now at this point, I'm going to draw in some landforms here. Do this all the time with these videos. Go and speed it up. When we get back, take a look at those landforms, and I'm going to introduce how I'm going to change this cross section. As far as the drawing goes, it's going to be over then. Going to head back to the maps, and I'm going to turn this thing into an animation so you can watch it change and hopefully visualize what's underneath Burke's Garden. So hang on just a minute. Okay, so probably going to work for now. Got a set of valley areas and ridges here. Like I said earlier, wherever that kind of brick red, maroon, whatever it looks like on your particular screen, wherever that layer is poking out of the Earth's surface, you're gonna have a mountain there. Okay, so the stacking pattern, if you will, of the rock layers here is what controls the landscape. Now, this is like something you'd see up north of Burks Garden. In fact, kind of right in the I-77 corridor, up above like Dismal Creek, Kimberling area. If you're a Southwest Virginia type. Now I'm going to change this a little bit, just sort of to introduce the idea. What if I took this maroon layer and kind of bent it up like that? All right, let's say it's got a fold in it right here. Okay. And I'm not going to try to switch lines around in there. Somebody's got a hack for a quick change in paint that uses the fill tool in this case, man. I don't know. I'm happy to hear it if there is one. Manually, I am going to draw this in so that orange layer there is going to be cranked up like that. We'll have the nice kind of blue gray one there is going to be cranked up as well. Okay. There we go. All right. Well, this is kind of an interesting predicament. What are you gonna put underneath there? You got a space problem, as geologists call it. Well, we'll have the deeper layer down here. We're going to break and push that up underneath it to kind of hold it up here. Right. So something like that. More of the old blue gray here. Try to keep these thicknesses within reason. That's a big part of drawing cross sections like this when you're playing for keeps, I guess, as we will call it. We're not playing for keeps right now. This is just for illustrative purposes. But if you were again kind of doing it right, you would be paying very close attention to your thicknesses and also how long all of this stuff would be if you stretched it back out. But for us today in paint, we're gonna be all right like this. Okay. All right, so that's not so bad right there. Okay, so we've put a big arch in that layer right there. Well, that needs to be eroded down kind of to the same level of everything else. So here comes nice erosion here, and you may have a sense of where this is going. Because that big arch there in the landscape, we just made ourselves two new mountain ridges when erosion cracks that open, just like you see happening right there. Whoop. That ain't gonna work. Oh my goodness, steady hand. Come on, people. Ooh, there we go. All right. That's gonna work now. So in fact, if that big arch extends only so far, that's going to give you kind of two ridges that close together. And what I just drew in there would be something like Round Mountain, which Interstate 77 rides right by. And that arch, where it's been cut into by erosion there, that's the idea of Burke's Garden. It's a big convex up geologic structure that has been broken open, if you will, by erosion. We call it a breach dome. And that erosion and weathering has kind of hollowed all those weaker rocks out of the middle of it. And that arch is just localized. It's kind of like you would imagine something like dragging a rug across a baseball on a floor or something like that, where you'd have this otherwise pretty flat sheet and then kind of just right in this one isolated area. It's got this kind of big hump in it. Okay, that's the Burks Garden concept. Now, went through all that. I'm gonna change this a bunch of times. And I'm going to save them under different names, and I'm going to make old school Mickey Mouse style cartoon that's going to show these layers changing and the different landforms that they're going to make. If you watched all this, awesome. If not, whatever. This animation coming up is what you actually came here for. So going to mess with that, and then we'll hop back to the rest of it. Okay, so that's how you got to train your mind, I guess, right? Sandstone makes ridges, shale and limestone are going to make the valleys. If you know where all these different rock types are, you can start from the land surface and kind of project downward and start to come up with the geologic structures that actually shape the landscape in this part of the world. So we're going to take all those drawings I said I was going to put together and try to look at them sequentially and get a sense for the structural geology that makes Burke's Garden what it is, right? So here's an image, got it labeled up: shale, sandstone, limestone, and dolomite. The orange there is also kind of a shale layer. Not going to worry too much about it here. Just need a few of these kind of benchmarks in the geologic column so we know what's going to make the ridges and what's going to make the valleys. Out there in the Appalachian Plateau, kind of off on that edge. That's over in West Virginia. That's Coalfield, West Virginia. The layers are mostly flat lying. They're actually a little bit younger than anything we're talking about with Burke's Garden. Got the sandstone, shale, and coal and whatnot out there. Don't worry about those, at least for this video, right? That maroon layer that makes the ridges, that particular sandstone, in this case, also the limestone and dolomite, kind of that blue gray. Those are the ones that you really want to focus on, right? Okay. There is another sandstone involved here. That one can make a ridge if there's enough of that purple layer to capture that. Also, really not going to be a question here. Don't worry about that one too much. All right. So concentrate on the maroon sandstone, the limestone and dolomite, and focus particularly on the area that arrow is pointing to. All right. So right now we're north of Burke's Garden, and there's actually kind of a big broad valley there that purple rock is producing on the land surface. So we're going to go south now, and this would be what you'd see if you cut the earth open through Round Mountain, which is on the north edge of Burke's Garden, but south of where we just were. What changed there? Well, a little hump has developed in that sandstone layer, and that pokes out at the surface, and that's what's actually making Round Mountain. Okay, go a little bit further south. This is Burke's Garden proper. Those layers have really been arched up there, and the arch goes up and comes back down. You don't have that arch to the north, and we're not going to have it to the south either, right? So it really is like this localized raising of the rock layers. Erosion has cut the top off of it, and that would be sort of almost right through the middle of Burke's Garden, but not quite. Burke's Garden is pretty wide. It's about 4 miles wide, so that would be just shy of 7 kilometers. The drawing here is a little bit vertically exaggerated just so we can see the details a little bit better. The entire thickness of folded layers below Burke's Garden should be maybe about 5.5 kilometers. It should actually be a little bit thinner than the maximum width of the valley, right? So the actual kind of layout and scales here are interesting to consider as well. But we're just after the fundamentals, right? So we're going to back up. So north of Burke's Garden, just that valley there. Move south, you got a little bit of a hump there, then a much bigger one. That's where Burke's Garden with the big open valley is. Those deeper layers have been raised up enough that erosion's already gotten to them. Going to go south again, off the south end of Burke's Garden. Things are dropping back down. We don't have that big wide valley. There's the big wide valley that's now north of us. And if you go even further south yet, everything changes. There's not any kind of raising of the rocks in line with Burke's Garden at all. In fact, the raising of the rocks in this case is out to the northwest. And Thompson Valley, this topographic feature is now like where everything has been arched up there, right? So we'll back up and go through it all again. So North Burke's Garden Valley, rocks are raised a little bit. Rocks are really cranked up, not cranked up so much, not cranked up at all, right? So it's being able to think kind of in these serial cross sections that is the key to sort of getting the X-ray vision for the valley and ridge. But the takeaway message is that Burke's Garden, that big valley, is just where there's a big arch in the rock layers. It's an anticline, meaning that the sides of it slope away from each other going down into the earth, and it kind of tapers out on both ends as well. So it literally is, or was, kind of an oval shaped dome. And again, erosion has cut that open. When the erosion gets through the sandstone and gets down into that limestone and dolomite, it really goes crazy. And you end up with just kind of the outline of the dome that's framed up by the sandstone. So this is what's on a structural geologist's mind in the Appalachians, right? They're thinking about where the valley forming layers are, how they've been lifted or kind of folded down, where the sandstones are in outcrop, where they've been lifted or folded down, and so on and so forth, right? So that's the mindset. And trying to take this back to the map now, if you cut it open there north of Burks Garden, you'd see that cross section. If you cut it open through Round Mountain, you'd see the little bump right there that's just kind of barely poking out of the landscape. Round Mountain, clever name. It is very round because it is quite literally just that hump of sandstone that has not yet been cracked open by erosion. And then if you cut open Burke's Garden proper, really big arch there, and the sandstone layer has been very much cut open by erosion, and you're seeing the valley that's developed on those deeper layers. What's cool about Burke's Garden is if you started drilling in the middle of it, which no one to my knowledge has done, and that's actually kind of interesting because this is a place that would certainly attract oil and gas attention. The rocks would get older, 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 and then suddenly they'd start getting younger again, and then they'd get older, older, older again. Very classic Appalachian arrangement, and that's a product of these layers just stacking on top of one another time and time again. A lot of good stories about how people have figured that out over the years in this part of the world, and it's actually been very impactful to geology elsewhere on the planet. Right, so put them all together. You can almost start thinking about like big fancy block diagrams here that would have several of these sections that would give you kind of this sort of 3D sense of what's happening under the ground. But again, the fundamental takeaway: why is this unusual landform here? The rock is locally arched, and you just don't quite see that style of folding and arching and lifting elsewhere in the surrounding area, right? So it's an interesting thing to think about here in terms of just the sandstone layer, right? A way to simplify it. The yellow lines are showing how that sandstone layer is folded up on Round Mountain. A little bit of a bump in it there. Burke's Garden itself, big old arch in it. And as you come down south away from Burke's Garden, less lifting, and thus the garden outline sort of goes away there. So how much does this happen in the world? Is this like a one of a kind thing? Is this the only oval shaped valley that you're going to see that's a product of rock strength like this? Just how different layers are buckled and folded? No, not at all. There's a few more actually in the Appalachians. One of the best ones is in Pennsylvania, which runs off the edge of the screen there, but you can get the idea. Aptly named little town of Oval sits right in the middle of it, and this is just some Google Maps terrain. You can see the oval outline of that valley. It's exactly the same thing. It's just a localized arch in the layering, a little bit less arched on either side. Erosion has cracked that open, and it's sort of scoured out in limestones and dolomites here as well. This oval-shaped valley, so kind of a cool spot there. It's what it looks like in Google Earth. Nice farmland right in the middle of that thing, just like down in Burke's Garden. Limestone and dolomite make for pretty good farmland. The sandstone mountains up here, you can't really do much with those. Game lands, hunting, nice scenery, whatever. Very, very key down in the valleys for agriculture in these areas. Israel, interesting, kind of a change of pace there, but there are folded sedimentary sequences here. Couple really interesting examples of these cracked open domes, breached domes as we call them. This one's the best down southeast of the textile facility or whatever they call the code name for the research center there. Same thing down here to its west as well. Arched sedimentary rocks, erosion has cracked the hard ones open and gotten into softer rock and sort of scouring the insides out there. Pakistan got a cool one right here. This is in the Suleiman Fold Belt, kind of like a valley and ridge with different climate on it. The one in the middle here is kind of interesting because it cracked through one layer, but there's another resistant one down there underneath it. So you can't quite make a full like valley, I guess a valley chord dome here, but this is very much a dome shaped fold. It's just the layer sequence here is different, and you don't have just one surrounding mountain and one interior valley there. So is Burke's Garden globally unique? No. There are plenty of other examples of breach domes. This one's a pretty good one though, and certainly for Appalachian folks, it's well known, kind of a source of pride, particularly in Southwest Virginia. It's a really cool landform. It's cool to be in the middle of that valley and looking at the mountains all around. Interesting detail about it is that geologically, Burke's Garden is not long for this world. Right at the end of the arrow, right there, the sandstone that holds up the mountain ridges has actually been completely eroded away, and in the future, the valley will become continuous with the Thompson Valley. Now, in the future, really long term, I can't even estimate on what hundreds of thousands of years. I don't know. Don't worry about this happening in your lifetime, but it's a place and a landscape that has not stopped changing. And right in that area again, where the arrow is pointing there, that's where the most change is going to occur because that capping strong sandstone isn't there to protect the softer underlying layers anymore. Down the road, in terms of landscape evolution, Round Mountain will get will get cracked open there, and it will be kind of like a miniature version of Burke's Garden. Same idea, when erosion gets through the sandstone, it's going to get into those softer layers underneath and kind of hollow out a valley there. So things to come. We won't be around here to check it out, but suffice it to say, even down the road, geologically, topographically, the rock types are going to be controlling the landscape here. So cool place to think about, and one that shows up really well on Google Maps or Google Earth. And if you get on that national map, the LiDAR viewer, zoom in there, you can see a lot of the details of the structural geology here. You can actually see the sandstone layers, for example, that hold up the ridges around Burke's Garden. So what's next on here? Cumberland Gap, maybe. Had a lot of requests for that one. Interesting part of the world. It's going to follow Burke's Garden pretty well. Another chance to think about geologic structure and different rock types and when they intersect the land surface, the kind of patterns they make. Also got a video from out in the field, be a little bit different, kind of show you what gathering the information that leads to these interpretations actually looks like. So that'll be interesting to put together. That's pretty different, of course, from what I usually do. But again, hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you check those out down the road here.